Hello. Today is 13th of August, Tuesday, I guess. And I decided to start a new vlog that is going to be the remaining of the two books from Italian authors that I decided to read for the vlog several months ago. I don't even remember how long it has been, but it's been dragged out, obviously, for various reasons, because of other obligations and also brain fog. A lot of the time I haven't had concentration to read when I had the time. Doom scrolling is not good for you guys. It's not good for me. It's not good for anyone. So today I wanted to talk about actually more about the books that I've been reading for the essay that I'm writing. Primarily, I thought I was gonna have like this really short overview of everyday resistance in different parts of the world. I'm gonna focus on different historical contexts, different relations, social relations. I started with Europe, and then I was gonna basically, that was my starting point because of the colonization and how the social relations and class structures that existed here were transferred to the world, parts of the world that were colonized. Of course, I understood that I was not going to be addressing every single state or every single region or continent, but I was going to focus on these most prominent examples that I consider relevant for the topic. However, during the research, I ended up realizing that 15 pages is actually not enough for this, and you can write a whole dissertation just on this topic. So I had to narrow it down. So now that I've narrowed it down more than I originally thought I would, because several days ago I thought I was going to be able to narrow it down just a little bit, that it's not going to really overwhelmingly have an impact on the original idea that I had. However, writing, and it is because the way I write it's because of the way I write, and that's mostly related to the fact that I need to give a lot of historical context for particular historical time in order to elaborate how resistance was performed and what kind of resistance existed and what kind of role women had in this resistance. So it takes a lot more space for me to explain this historical context than it actually takes to write about the resistance itself. I'm sorry, I'm getting messages. Let me just switch that off. So the whole process of researching and reading is rather long for me. It takes a lot of time for me to kind of create this puzzle or piece out the puzzle of the whole essay, or at least like the skeleton of how it's going to look like. And in that process, I am spending a lot of time not just reading, but also skim reading different sources in order to be able to check references. And I'm going a lot of back and forth between sources and trying to understand how to structure part of the essay, or the whole of the essay in the end, but I'm doing it part by part. So at the moment, I am finishing the last chapter before I conclude it. And I just wanted to mention some of the literature that I used for my essay research. And I am actually this is the first time that I'm reading in depth on this topic about in depth on the topic of slavery, but from a very different perspective, I would say. I think I read some books, but this was like historical, and it was also talking about resistance. So it's very important the way these articles and books were written. So basically, some of these books and some of these authors and articles and the authors of the articles, they are very well established in their field of research. Although, even though this is my first time that I came across it. So hold on, let me just find the books that I am... Okay, so here are the books that I recently read. So, the comparative histories of slavery in Brazil, Cuba, and the United States. The description of the book says, this book is an introductory history of racial slavery in the Americas. Brazil and Cuba were among the first colonial societies to establish slavery in the early 16th century. So what this book does is actually gives you a comparative overview of these three slave-based economies. And I think it is very good for anyone who is interested to understand how these systems worked differently in these three countries. So if you are a beginner in this topic and if you want to learn more, this could be also a good start. This book is written by Laird Bergad. I don't think it's translated. Okay, I'm not really sure what's going on, but everybody is sending me messages. The moment I decided to sit down and start talking to you guys, all of a sudden I'm being flooded with messages. Paternalism, Transgression, and Slave Resistance in Brazil. That is a second book. It's written by Robson Pedrosa Costa. It is actually a PhD dissertation that was turned into a book, and it's a case study of Benedictine monasteries in Brazil that had slaves and how Catholic paternalism affected the structure of slave society in Brazil. And it talks also about the everyday resistance, but in really case-by-case detailed historiographical way, where the author is basically telling us what different sources that she used to do this research have documented. And a lot of the times you have to keep in mind that all of these sources, you have to read between the lines. What is written is not very straightforward, and it often hides a lot of these deeper structures of society that you generally will not be aware unless you actually research that period. And this particular book, I would say it's more case-based, so it's not talking about... It has like some overview of the Brazilian society, slave society as a whole, but it's mostly case-based to this particular topic. And then this third book is Slavery in Brazil, Francisco Vidal Luna and Herbert S. Klein. And this one is basically just the history of slavery in Brazil. It's very in-depth. I found some parts that I'm not sure whether I misunderstood, or as this is written by historians, it's very different from the perspective of political scientists. A lot of the time, these history books tend to take out socio-political context of the time. However, I didn't find that here, but there was one segment in the book that I was rather confused by, which later on he kind of refutes that whole statement in another paragraph that is like towards the end of the book. So I'm not sure what's going on there. If anyone has read this book, it would be really good to hear your thoughts. This would be also good for anyone who's just interested in the topic of slave society in Brazil and how it was implemented, about the process of colonialism and how the Portuguese, actually the slave system that the Portuguese implemented in Brazil was adopted later in the West Indies and also in the United States, a lot of their practices. But what is very interesting about Brazil is that they have a very unique social structure in comparison to other parts of the world where you had slave societies, that is like the West Indies and North America. So I think in that regard, it is also very interesting to think about how resistance was formed there and the way it manifested itself, and how actually the geography of Brazil enabled slaves, from whether they were born in Brazil at a later time or they were brought from West Africa, how it allowed them to escape more frequently and more successfully and form these free slave societies inside the Brazilian, where it was very difficult to track them and very difficult to kind of bring them back and sort of inflict some punishment. I mean, this was also the case. It was happening sometimes, but they had a higher rate of success of remaining free in these societies that they created as runaway slaves. And I also found it very interesting the class structure that was created by the Portuguese inside Brazil, that was very different from the class structure that was created in West Indies and North America. So those are kind of things that are very, very interesting to me. And maybe it will be interesting to you as well. I have also some articles that I would like to recommend because I do believe that they deserve also attention, equal attention as the books do. Let me just find that. So I guess the camera on the computer started recording at some point, and because I couldn't download the file on my phone, I don't know why. I think it is the internet connection. I have used my laptop to download it. Let's see if it's gonna open it now. Okay, here it is. So the articles that I wanted to mention, honorable mentions to articles, are Reis or Reis, J. Slave Resistance in Brazil, Bahia, 1807-1835. This article is rather long, it's 35 pages, and it's also a case study of slave resistance in this particular region in Brazil. However, a lot of these patterns, the way the slave society functioned there and how slaves were used as labor in what kind of industry, what kind of productions, is also found in other parts of Brazil. Another article I wanted to mention is Beckles, Hilary, A Riotous and Unruly Lot, Irish Indentured Servants and Freemen in the English West Indies. This academic is actually really good for anyone who wants to learn more about the slavery in the West Indies and particularly Barbados, but he actually has written many books and many articles. I managed to use 2 of his articles and I think one of his books. So another article that he wrote is White Women and Slavery in the Caribbean. And he talks a lot about these social structures that were created in the colonized West Indies and how they were used in order to enable the master class, the slave owners, to continue exploiting slaves in the plantations, different plantations, because the societal structure, the class structure that was formed there, it was formed in a way to divide different classes of the oppressed people so they would not be able to unite in their resistance. And because of these small differences that they had, like small privileges for certain groups, it actually made the groups more vulnerable and more easily manipulated to believe that the actual oppressed people are the enemy and not the ones who are ruling all over, like who are actually running the whole system. This sounded a little bit conspiratorial, but it's not. Okay, another article that I wanted to mention is Barbara Bush Slimani, A Hard Labor, Women, Childbirth and Resistance in British Caribbean Slave Societies. And this article is it's focused specifically on women and how women were integrated as labor force, especially the difference between white women and black women slaves. How actually the racial ideology was used to further divide possible unity between these 2 groups of women. Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, other books that I've used, and this is mostly for methodology, it's Weapons of the Weak, Everyday Form of Peasant Resistance by Scott J.C., and his Domination in the Arts of Resistance, Hidden Transcripts. That's, I think, everything of importance so far. So I will make a separate video on the books that when I read them and update you on what's going on there. I started reading Ginzburg, but I actually don't want to talk about it now because I believe that it deserves a separate talk part, as the book itself is fascinating. So this is the new ambient for the recording. I decided to change it because the last video that I made is in my room. It's always with the same background, my shelves. So because I didn't really record anything to make it into a vlog, and a difference between the ambient, I think it's going to communicate better the first part of the books that I tackled. That is mostly the material that I read for my essay. And then the second part is the last 2 books that I read for the Italian feminists reading log. And this will be the final part for it. It's been a while. I think I've announced the reading of these 3 books, I believe it was like May or beginning of June. I can't even remember. It was so long time ago. And now that I finished reading all 3 of them, I'm gonna wrap it up. And because I've been very lazy to record things that I've been doing in between and put little snippets of daily life, this is just going to be like a talk vlog, I guess. So the first book I'm going to discuss actually is the last book that I read. It's A Woman by Sibilla Aleramo, and the translator is Erika Segre and Simon Carnell. This was published in 2020, but the original Italian work was published in 1906. It is actually a fictionalized memoir, so maybe it differs in some aspects to the real life story that the author was trying to portray in the novel. And I was reading also online that she actually brought this up as an issue that she was convinced, I guess, by a publisher or an editor to change some things that she didn't want to change initially. And I think maybe in later publications, she actually did publish the novel the way that she saw, the way that she thought would be best for the story to be fictionalized. So what is the book about? It's basically about her life. I found it very similar to Alba de Cespedes, her side of the story. That is, the main protagonist is Sibilla herself, because it's sort of like a fictionalized memoir. It's not sort of, but it is a fictionalized memoir. And she's telling a story about her life from childhood, just like Alessandra was. And the main difference is that Sibilla's character is actually at the beginning very close and infatuated with her father figure. While on the other hand, Alessandra doesn't really have a good relationship with her father from the very beginning. She's not very close to him in any way. Over time, this love that she has for father and disdain that she has for her mother sort of shifts, and she begins to become more aware why her mother is the way she is. That is, she is perceived by her as very weak, unable to stand up for herself, is very melancholic and sad. She's withdrawn. She doesn't have any authority over her children, while her father is the total opposite of that. And soon she realizes why that is the case, and we are led on a journey of her awakening as a feminist author. That is, a woman who is slowly growing and understanding what patriarchal oppression is, and that all of these things that she initially found admirable in her father are actually part of this wider oppressive structure that he's taking part in, and which is also sort of chaining her mother in this state of melancholy and depression. Then the story actually begins while they're living in Milan, and they soon move to south part of Italy, where her father is offered the position to run a factory. And Aleramo analyzes very well the cultural difference between the north and the south, but also the urban and rural conflict that exists, the mentality of the people who live in rural parts of Italy in comparison to this up-and-coming bourgeois class in the south of Italy that is slowly being industrialized. She's very well aware of the class differences that exist, and this pops up here and there throughout the novel, especially when she talks about her position later in life as a married woman who is abused by her husband, and the women who are also abused by their husbands but who come from a poor background, who are working class women. And we see her in this environment as a young adolescent who is actually employed by her father in the factory, in the administration, because there is no educational facilities in the village where they live. So he gives her a job at the factory and she starts working there. And she talks about the relationship she develops with some colleagues there. Among them is the man that she's going to marry. And this man actually rapes her when she's 15 years old. And soon after that, he proposes, and her family sort of puts a little bit of a pressure on her, and they get married. Eventually, she gives birth to her child, and throughout the novel, we see her trying to get agency, like obtain agency, but the struggle is so strong and her husband is very abusive and oppressive that whatever fight she's putting up, it's proving futile. So she's kind of choosing at points a path of least resistance, where she's tackling this minefield of what she can do to prevent any possible situation that might irritate him or anger him that can lead to violence. She basically is very frequently physically abused. He's also raping her. At one point, I think it was insinuated that he also got syphilis from his extramarital sexual activities, and she's trying to protect herself from the viral infection, and he actually, in that process, he rapes her. The thing is that in the novel, she doesn't use this explicit language, and sometimes it's very nuanced and it's very kind of carefully picked words to describe the actions taken by her husband in a very subtle way. At one point, she even embarks on like a journey of having an affair herself, for which she's repeatedly punished for the years that she remains with him. In the end, I mean, of course, she's trying to leave this marriage, but the law is not on her side. And this is something that is addressed throughout the novel, that the law sees her as property. And she says, like, I'm less than a cattle that some men own in this country. And she sees how law is actually enabling this system of oppression, and hence is preventing her from gaining full autonomy over her life, her body, her future, and her present. So I would say that overall the novel is very heavy. I don't think any of the books have impacted me as much as this one, of the 3 novels that I'm doing for this theme. It's rather, at points, it's very hopeless. She's going back and forth with this idea. She's contemplating suicide quite frequently. And I found this theme of suicide as the only way to escape patriarchal oppression for women, that this theme appears also in Cespedes' novel when Alessandra's mother commits suicide. So she is contemplating this throughout the book, and first her mother makes an attempt which proves to be a failed attempt, but it leads her down this slow death where eventually she becomes institutionalized, she's physically subdued, and becomes completely mentally unaware, that is, of her surroundings, of herself, who she was or who she became, and how she became after all. And Sibilla, because her mother had experienced this, is also trying to contemplate the thought of suicide, but at the same time she's resisting it because she wants to live. And we see that this resistance is rather strong in the end. she does leave her husband, but at the cost of losing her child. And that is one thing that for the last, I think, 50 pages, where she's going into great detail, this mental process, this anguish, this agony that she's going through while trying to make a decision what she should do. Is her son going to condemn her more if she commits suicide? Is he going to condemn her more if she doesn't resist at all and just lets her husband completely have ownership over her, and she should just, give in to all of his pressures, all of his manipulations and controls? Or should she leave? So she's going back and forth, and I feel like she was so good at conveying this. I'm sorry. Conveying this idea of what kind of emotional anguish women who are in this position go through. And for a reader to actually experience that, at points I was getting quite irritated, but then she would remind the reader why she's going back and forth so much. It's basically because she has no options. There is no law that can protect her. Her family cannot give her any safety net. She doesn't have basically anything to lean on. And even at one point, she inherits the money from her uncle. Even that financial net that she thought she could fall on is taken away because her husband legally owns that money. It's his money. It's not her money because she's considered his property. So she doesn't have really anyone to turn to. And at one point, we see also that her class will offer her an escape that will cost her still her child, but at least she had that, because other women who come from working class background don't even have that option. And this book, I would say, is a brilliant analysis on that topic. On the other hand, Sagittarius was a really fun novel to read. I mean, it's sad. It's very plot driven, but it's also character driven. It's again told from a perspective of the youngest daughter of the woman in question. And I felt like this novel was a brilliant analysis of the epitome of Balkan mother's victimhood. I thought at times it felt like maybe Natalia Ginzburg visited the Balkans and noticed this phenomenon here. But I mean, I guess it exists in other cultures. I'm sure it exists in other cultures as well. But I found it so interesting that she is describing the character of the mother as this obsessed with status in society, with being perceived as this outwardly smart person who just hasn't had the opportunity to reach her potential, and this kind of arrogance eventually gets her into trouble, really big trouble. But I found it also interesting that the character of the mother is lost. She really, it looks like she knows what she wants, but at times it feels like she's overwhelmed with all of these ideas that are brewing inside her. And I was thinking about how might she have been when she was younger, before she got married and had children, before her whole identity of being an individual outside of this identity of being a mother and a wife, how she was, and how the stripping of this individual identity outside of these roles within the patriarchal family had actually subdued her and made her feel small. And maybe the way she behaves is actually a rebellion against that. And for short synopsis of the novel, we are following a young woman who's telling a story of her mother who's trying to find a suitor for her older daughter, and she has her hopes high, and she's really trying to marry her off well, but of course this fails, and every time she's trying to do good by her family members, she feels like nobody's really appreciating her efforts, and nobody's seeing the potential of her ambition, not just for herself, but for her children as well. And I found it really, it's funny. It's a funny book, but it's a sad book at the same time. It really reminded me of so many middle-aged women that I met in the Balkans who actually believe that they have been somehow, they probably have been wronged by society in the sense that nobody saw their potential, and now they're trying to correct this through their children. And when they fail, under quotation marks, or that is the idea that they're trying to project on their children, does not take root, they feel utterly defeated, and in that defeat they feel like nobody's really appreciating everything they're trying to do for the family members. I'm not going to say anything more about this book because I feel like I would spoil it more for the theme of this book. It's very kind of straightforward. It is not driven. It's not a plot-driven novel, but this one, it is plot-driven, and I feel that me giving out more information about what's going to happen, it would maybe ruin it for you to enjoy this humoristic side. I sometimes, depends from novel to novel, I sometimes decide to reveal more, sometimes less. It depends. It's my personal judgment, I guess, but it also depends how excited I am to share the teeny tiny details that can actually affect the broader analysis of it. But for this one, I really think I shouldn't say more. Overall, for all three books, and I don't have the physical copy of the Alba de Cespedes' novel, I'll just insert the image here. I would say that it was really nice to read three of them. There was obviously a lot of space in between as I was doing other things and reading other novels and other theoretical books. But by the end of finishing this book, I felt like it was just too much for me. I think I've reached a point of oversaturation with this theme. So for my next vlogs, I am thinking to leave space for you to be surprised what's gonna come next. As in, I am going to be doing a theme vlog as well, but I'm not gonna reveal what it is. And the second thing I'm going to say is that I'm also going to film another video, which is like a big book haul video. And that's going to probably come sometime in September. September is actually starting this weekend, I think. But still, I am going to film it probably by the end of September because I'm going to order some new books and I want to do like a little bit of a longer video for a book haul. I already have many books, but I still want to include the ones that I want to order. Okay, enough about that. I'm just yammering now. So thank you for sticking around and thank you for watching. I hope if you're new here, please subscribe. And if you have read any of these books that I've talked about in this vlog or in previous vlogs for the Italian feminist theme, I would really appreciate to hear your thoughts. Or if you have read or are planning to read any of the theoretical books that I shared in the previous part of this reading yammering session, then please do share. Or if you have any other recommendations for me, I would appreciate also you sharing what you're reading, or if you have any books that you have read or would like to read but think that would fit into this category, this theme that I was analyzing. I would appreciate also that. So thank you for watching, and I think Moots is saying hi with her one ear. You can see it, it's over there. Whoop, whoop. Moots! Moots! She's ignoring me. She was sleeping and I woke her up. So, see you in the next one. Bye!